welcome to Extras. In this UML Operator Extra, we're going to be talking about from class to code. Remember, I don't teach coding in this channel. I talk about, don't want to say teach, I share the principles and approaches to unified modeling language, computer-aided software engineering. So we're going to build a simple class element, and we're going to build out some stubbed code. How's that? So we're going to start with a platform independent model, or PIM, and then we're going to look at a couple of DSLs, domain specific languages, in this episode. So look forward to getting into this. In the past year, we've talked about reverse engineering code. We've talked about building database and tables via modeling approach, so model driven. We've talked about UI design, where we can apply what we've done from the bottom up data and code to a top down requirement. So we've covered a lot in this exercise, and we're going to start with a blank slate, and let's get rolling, huh? All right, remember my workspace is set up with Toolbox on the left, Browser on the right. I have Pen and Zoom and Inspector. In the lower right, I have Notes, Properties, Traceability, Features, which has operations. We're going to be focused on scripting and more. All right. So we're focused on features and operations. In order to get to this, just go to Start, go to Properties, and then you see here element features. You can select features, attributes, operations. If you select any of these, I'm going to select operations. It's going to bring up this feature window, and then you can place this thing anywhere you want. All right. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to bring in a class element, and we're simply going to call this cart. All right. This is a e-commerce application. We're focused on shopping cart in this discussion with the team right now. And we want to define what a cart class looks like, what a cart object looks like. So let's get started. So the first thing that we want to do in defining this element is go to the notion of operations right here. We have a blank slate, and let's start defining this. So the first thing we're going to need is a cart ID, a unique identifier for the cart. Don't worry about anything to the right at this particular point. We're just going to be focused on the name of the operations that we want to put in here. So we're going to need to tie back to a content ID. All right. That's in some repository. You might call it a product ID. You might call it an offer ID or something else. It's all content to us, whether it's in a product database, an offer recommendation database, or even the content management or web servers content store. So we're just going to use content ID as our reference. All right. So the next operation is, well, we want to understand when the item was added into the cart, right? So date selected, date added, anything that you want to call that, we're going to use date selected. The next thing we want is some sort of true-false reference is in cart. Now, this is kind of interesting from a Boolean perspective, but there are items that may be brought into the cart, then removed from the cart, but we don't necessarily want to lose fact that during the customer session, the user session, that they showed interest in an item. We may use that to further assist them. For instance, they may add a product or something to the cart that actually requires the item that they had already taken out of the cart, and we can instantly bring it up. So there's performance benefits to that, right? The next thing we want to do is create something that refers back to the content store, all right? So we're just going to simply call this operation content store, right? And there could be more, but we're just going to start out with these 5 to get us going. The next thing we want to do is start adding some definition to these elements. For instance, what's the return type, right? So remember, we did not choose, let me open up the dialog box here. This is platform independent. We do not choose a language yet. So when you're going to look at different types, they're somewhat relevant to the language that you chose, whether it's C#, Java, Python, C++, etc. Right? So if there's no languages chosen in Sparx, you have a limited choice in the return types. But we know it's not void. So what we're going to do is return an integer, right? And for the content ID, same thing, integer. We're looking for these key values relevant to the data table, data object. Date selected, we're going to make this an integer as well, although as soon as we go to a language or technology type, we're going to be, I don't want to say locked, but we're going to be guided by whatever that language type is. So we're just going to leave it integer. You could certainly make it a string and then convert the string to, a date, short, long, etc. But we're just going to leave it as integer, right? Now we know that this is a Boolean question, true or false. So we're going to set it to Boolean, right? And then as far as the content store goes, well, we don't have anything that's selected here. We're actually looking for an entity. We're looking for an object that is outside of the cart class to refer to. So we would come down here and select it, and we would look for that. But let's define that first. So we're not going to choose anything right now for this one. And you can see that our selections are already reflected. Therefore, let me move this up here. Therefore, we need to bring in something that represents the content store. All right. Now, when we go with the technology we're going to go with, it's going to actually build from our database. We're going to use the entity framework out of the .NET platform, but ultimately we're going to go with C# as a language, but it could be any other language, and we could use any framework we want. Right now, we just need a generic reference for content store. So we select it. You notice in the feature window that this is blank. We're going to operations, and we want to start defining the content store operations, responsibilities, if you will. So in this case, we're going to have a content ID or just ID. Let's just go down the list. We're going to have a type of content, right? Go down the list. We may have a subject area, and that's going to be an ID. It's going to be a key value from the table. And then we may have a subject ID itself, subject area versus subject. This helps us build on a taxonomy within our content store, right? And then what we might have is a title. And of course, we're going to have a lot more. Right? So now we've defined the content store ID. When we go back here, we can select individual elements, and from those elements, it's zooming in on it. Now, when I go to the return type and I hit this drop down, select type, particular design, we have content store chosen, and we can select it, right? So now you see in the cart that this operation is returning content store object or data element. All right, so now let's convert this class element to a domain-specific language, a DSL, and we're going to use C#, right? And we could certainly use Python or Java. Any of these selections, Sparx Enterprise Architect supports out of the box. We're going to use C# and we're going to hit apply. We're going to go to this element here. We're going to convert this one to C# as the language being used, right? Now, when I select these elements and I look at the return types, they're specific to C#. All right, if I was to change it to Python, they'd be specific to Python. Same with Java or any other language. So when we're looking at date and time, is there a reference in here to date and time, right? So we would usually leave this as an integer and then convert it within the code set. If it is a data element, we may convert it to a string and then convert that to a date. There's lots of different ways to approach it. I'm going to leave it at integer, right? So everything worked fine here going from the generics as we're going forward. But one thing that did open for us was stereotypes. So in Sparx, if I select this because we have chosen C#, by default, it is still locked onto EA-UML, which gives us these selections. But you'll notice that if I hit the profile and I go to C#, I get these specific stereotypes to what C# offers. We're changing these to properties, right? So we will do that all the way down for this particular class element. So to speed the video up, I went through, added the stereotype property to each one of these elements, these operations that are in these elements, these class elements. I also, to speed the video up, created a cart model. This is the code that's going to handle the CRUD capabilities over our data, all right? So CRUD, create, read, update, delete. In this case, I'm using insert, update, delete, and then read as get, right? So when we're looking at the insert, now we start defining parameters. So we're going to come in here. We're going to define a parameter called cart on a type called cart. So we're going to look down here and we're going to select type called cart. There we go. And this is going to be an in, and you can add notes if you want to. I'm not going to do that. All right. So we've defined the first one called cart. The next one, update, we're going to need an ID, and that's going to be an int. And then we're going to need our cart, right? And so that is going to be cart. And then this is type cart. Yeah, let's go ahead and bring it in. So get type, we're going to get our cart. There we go. And then this is also going to be in for us, all right? So there we go. Didn't mean to do that. This next one's going to be ID, because we need the object ID, right? And then the next one is going to be for ID, because we need that ID, and it's going to be int as well, right? Now, let's see here. This is, of course, not return type void. This is a string. So we go down and we change the return type, and you can just tab through these and type them yourself. It's a lot faster. Hit the first letter and it will zoom in on it. Has that type of intelligence, right? So now we've got return type, we've got scope, it's all public. We're not going to add any stereotypes at this point. And now we define our cart model that is going to be dealing with cart from our content store, right? All right, so now let's stub out this code. Now, typically what you're going to do is you're going to go to your Start tab, you're going to go to your Preferences, in your Preferences, your source code engineering. And then for each one of your source codes engineering, you're going to choose your repository, your source code repository, where you're going, and what editor you're using. In this case, I'm using Visual Studio, right? You don't have to do that. You can certainly generate your code anywhere you want, but we're going to leave these settings for this repository. So I'm going to select the element. We're going to go to Develop. We're going to go to Generate. And I'm just going to generate the single element here just for this demonstration. So single element, it knows the language that we chose, the DSL, was C#. And it automatically goes to where our repository is to write this. And this is going to our app code, models, because this is a model, code model. And this is, it takes the name that you gave the class element, and this is where it's going to generate it. Let's go ahead and stub this out, right? And it's just that fast, all right? And if you look at properties, let's drag properties out here, right? If you look at properties, it remembers the source where this code is represented. I'm going to go ahead and close that. And we're just going to hit F12, function key 12. It is going to open up the editor, the IDE that we used. And here's the code that we just created. We stubbed out. This is not real working code yet. Now we can come over to our IDE. And this is, I use the IntelliSense of the integrated development environment, IDE, to actually build out and generate the code. All right. You'll notice that Sparx puts in the notes for you. And if you were to add any notes at each one of these operation levels, it would add those notes. It brings in the libraries that you're using, and then you can certainly add more libraries. This is end up being a web API, but we would add that in later during our development exercise. And then the real working code after developers are done may look something like this. This is real working code that's utilized in this platform in production today. All right, that concludes this episode. Thanks very much for watching. And until the next time we meet, happy modeling.